coming back to the thinking classrooms. Chapter 4 was a very short chapter, but really interesting chapter, especially for a science folk which have very limited space. And it was all about how you organize your classroom. So, for example, if a student comes into a classroom that is very organized, then they will believe that the course will be linear and what they're experiencing is linear and everything that they experience is going to be organized as well. So, the challenge with that is that if you come into an overly organized and overly routine classroom, then you won't think because thinking is messy and thinking is nonlinear and thinking is like disorganized. And so they don't want to kind of mess with the order of the room. So if your room is too perfect, then they won't be willing to think because they're worried about messing up the system. However, if you have too much chaos in the room, then it also isn't a good thinking classroom because then it's too, like, there's just too much going on that they can't focus on what they need to think on. So, where do we land? So, the idea is actually to have no front to the classroom. And this is really interesting because as we've moved and added like projectors to all our classrooms and stuff, we all have a natural like front to the classroom. And so I've always naturally set up my classroom, even in groups, so that everyone can look at the front really easily, because then I don't want having people to turn their chairs all the time. But the challenge is then is I had my class too symmetrical. And when you front a room, then the kids don't think that it's like too much order, too much symmetry, so they don't want to mess things up. So what you need to do is have, for example, every chair ideally facing a slightly different direction on a compass. You're going to have disorder. So you're like in my room, I had kind of like 5 pods equally spaced around the room. You don't want them equally spaced around the room. And you want it to kind of have a little bit of a disorder, a little bit of chaos, and things like not symmetrical. So it doesn't fit beautifully in. And so it triggers kind of like it's like a disruptor. And that disruptor is what gets the thinking happening, which is great. The only challenge is that a lot of us in science are, for example, are in rooms with lab benches or have desk furniture that doesn't fit in a way that can be like unsymmetrical. Like I've got these massive tables that fit 3 and we're supposed to be in groups of 3, so then I would have random big tables all over the room and it wouldn't make cohesive nice little groups. So this is a really interesting challenge that we will have from a science perspective, as a lot of times our furniture isn't movable or able to create this kind of like disruptive asymmetrical no one's facing the same direction piece. The nice thing though is that if you unfront the teacher, so for example, you moving around the classroom and always teaching from a different spot or helping from a different spot and not kind of staying in one space at the front, can help disrupt this kind of thinking about this frontward facing classroom. And also changing, like, so maybe your furniture doesn't move, but the chairs will move. So for example, instead of always having kids in their stools facing the front, have some of those stools so the kids are clustered. And so some are facing the front and some are facing the back all the time and kind of squishing them together. It's awkward, but actually it creates this like disruptive thinking classroom that basically they're looking for. So Chapter 4 was all about how you organize a space, and the goal is to make sure it's not too clean, not too crazy, but enough chaos to cause like a thinking classroom and kind of make it messy enough that kids feel safe to mess it up even more if their thinking is derailed. Because if it's too perfect and too in a line, then kids don't want to mess up the system. And so you want to allow them to have the freedom to mess up the system. Interestingly, when a kid walks into a class that has like a bit of a chaotic look to it, students come into it anticipating something different. And so what you want to do is have the students walk into your classroom expecting something different, because then that's when the thinking happens. So that was chapter 4 today.